Well, good morning and welcome everyone. We appreciate you joining us. We appreciate you joining us for this interactive session from the Postsecondary Teaching with Technology Collaborative. I'm Deborah Jonas, I'm the center's PI. And next slide, Hannah. We have a sizable representation of folks from our team and our guest panelist, Terrell Morton, as well. Today, we'll introduce the new R&D Center, share what we're about and the focus of our research and our national leadership activities. We'll spend some time reflecting on equity in the center's work, and with your contributions, we look forward to a rich discussion throughout the day. And Meredith?
Yes, thank you. My name is Meredith Larson. I'm from IES and I'm the program officer helping this team to achieve its wonderful mission. And I'd like to introduce the full team. I think everybody here on this slide is also spotlit. So we have Deborah Jonas, we have Nikki Edgecombe, Rebecca Griffiths, and our guest speaker, Terrell Morton. And just real briefly, I am thrilled to be the program officer for this project. IES has invested in other R&D centers for post-secondary education, but this one is new and really trying to transform some of the conversation. So instead of focusing on the policies and systems that can help students access and persist and complete their post-secondary, we're trying to understand what do teachers and students need to improve the quality of instruction, to improve the quality of the experience that teachers have with the students and that students have with one another and in their classrooms. We're also aware that technology is transforming who can access post-secondary, how they can access post-secondary, and what it might mean to be a post-secondary student. So this team is taking a really interesting approach to the conversation, looking at, depending on your background, soft skills, 21st century work skills, self-directed learning, intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies, those things outside of the foundational skills that students need to thrive in courses that can help them to really persist and be motivated and to achieve what they're trying to achieve in their classes and in their programs. I don't want to take up any more time, so I want to hand this back to the center and have them do their initial kickoff. And just as a reminder, they just started last fiscal year. So like as of August, I believe, that was like their first full month. So with that, Deborah.
Thanks so much, Meredith. We actually want to start today with a poll to help us learn a bit more about who's with us. We have two questions and you can find the link to the poll in the chat. The first question is, at what education level does your research focus on? And the second is, what is the focus of your research? And we'll give you a bit to answer. If you have problems accessing the poll, let us know. So thanks, Hannah, for sharing the answers. I don't know if that can get any larger, but so with us today, we have 28 folks who focus their research on post-secondary, 18 on secondary, 14 on adulthood, and 9 elementary. And growth through adults. Very interesting, Sarah. And then we have people with a wide variety of research areas that they're focused on, which is exciting. We appreciate you sharing. It's helpful for our team to know who's here as we think about our presentation. And we hope it helps you to engage in discussions throughout the session. One thing I did want to share is you're welcome to ask your questions and provide comments. Oh, not everyone can access the poll. Hannah, do you have any ideas? Do you want to put the link back? You can copy the link back in.
Yes, I just put the link back in, and if you want, you can also go to menti.com and put in this code.
Great online PD and coaching for teachers. Well, thank you. We hope this helps us and you engage with us throughout the session. You're welcome to put questions and comments in the chat throughout, and we do have ample time for discussion. This is really interesting. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Hannah. Thank you. I wanted to briefly introduce the center a little bit, one level lower from where Meredith shared. We're investigating how faculty can adapt their teaching and use of technology features to help students apply and strengthen a set of mindsets and strategies, such as their sense of belonging, self-efficacy, and also help-seeking and self-evaluation skills, broadly known as self-directed learning skills. In the literature, you may see them referred to as self-regulated learning as well. Our research focuses on identifying effective self-directed learning practices for use with ed tech and supporting faculty to embed these teaching practices in online environments. So our research and our national leadership program brings together content from 3 areas: educational technology, faculty development, and the wide range of self-directed learning constructs that we know are important for students' success in post-secondary. I want to turn this over now to Rebecca Griffiths, who will share more about the center and our work.
Can you go back, Hannah? Thank you, Deborah. So our center covers a number of different intersecting domains: the self-directed learning, online learning, STEM education, faculty development. There's sort of a lot to get your head around. So I'm going to kind of reiterate some of the points that Deborah and Meredith shared about the focus of our work, and maybe even go a little bit deeper. And hopefully by the end of this, it'll sort of be starting to become clear. So in a nutshell, the Postsecondary Collaborative is a research and capacity building center that aims to study and improve how faculty teach and use technology to help students apply and strengthen self-directed learning skills in online courses, leading to greater success. That's a lot of words that we have here. So I want to just highlight a few that are really important. One is teach. So the focus of our work is really on how faculty support students' skill development through their instructional strategies. We are concerned with how support for skills development can be embedded in coursework, as opposed to other kinds of interventions that focus on students through advising or other types of initiatives underway in the institutions. A second focus is on use of technology. So we are focused on online courses. And so instructors' ability to use technology tools in service of effective instructional strategies is another really key component of our work. Let me just add that the massive transition to online learning, it's been picking up momentum over a couple decades, but in the past few years, we've had this on nearly wholesale transition to various kinds of remote learning, and this seems likely to endure. We know that online courses place a new set of demands on both faculty and students in the ways that they teach and manage their learning, and that a lot of people arrive, both on the faculty and student side, arrive at college without having developed the skills and the training to succeed or to do their best work in these environments. So it's really essential that institutions are putting policies and supports in place to address some of the stresses that are caused by this transition to online learning and to make sure that everyone is positioned to succeed. And this, again, involves skillful use of technology in service of good teaching. A third important concept here is self-directed learning. And as Deborah said here, we're referring to the cognitive, metacognitive, behavioral, emotional, and motivational competencies that students use to plan their learning, to manage their time, to reflect on progress, and to improve their study skills. Some scholars in this field include students' sense of belonging and confidence as necessary precursors to mastery-oriented learning, whereby students are focused on learning the skills and knowledge in their coursework rather than being concerned with protecting the self or on performance-oriented goals. While the term self-directed learning suggests that the onus is on the students to manage this process, we're arguing that instructors play a really critical role in creating course environments in which students feel safe and accepted, and thus can focus their energy on course knowledge and skills. So when we talk about self-directed learning, we're really talking about a broad set of skills and that begin with the environment that instructors create to support students' learning and development and application of those skills. So Hannah, now we can go to the next slide. The collaborative's approach to self-directed learning draws from a large body of theory. As Meredith said, we've looked at research in intra and interpersonal learning and soft skills, 21st century skills. There are lots of ways that people refer to this basket of skills. One framework that we have found useful in thinking about how to design our research and to focus our work is Zimmerman's three-stage cyclical model. This describes a process of forethought, performance, and self-reflection, which can take place at the task level or at a much larger grain size at the course level. And so ultimately, we're interested in how instructors can attend to supporting all these stages of self-directed learning or self-regulated learning in their course design and delivery. So we've seen many interventions where faculty members or other initiatives are targeting specific skills within this framework. We're really interested in how instructors might take an integrated approach to supporting these students in developing and applying these skills throughout a course. At the same time, we're aware that this field of scholarship largely emerged from more homogeneous educational settings, and that there's a real lack of empirical research examining the ways in which underlying constructs might vary by culture and context. Addressing this gap is an important goal for the collaborative, so we're putting a lot of thought into how we can account for considerations around equity and various forms of diversity in our research designs. We saw this particular event as a great opportunity to hear from you all who are doing related research and hopefully also thinking about these questions about how to account for culture and context in your research designs and in how you're engaging with the institutions and students. So in service of this goal, and Hannah, can you go to the next slide? The Postsecondary Collaborative has also partnered with 9 broad access colleges and universities, 5 of which are recognized as minority serving institutions. And together with this group of partners, we're going to be conducting research to advance our understanding of how self-directed learning concepts are perceived and supported in a range of settings with diverse student groups. Next. Finally, I'd like to just call some attention to our focus on online STEM courses. A couple points to emphasize here. One is that many institutions currently attempt to support self-directed learning skill development through student success courses, as I said, other kinds of efforts on campus. And we're really interested in how these skills can be supported within academic coursework. We're specifically focused on gateway STEM courses because these present a challenge for many students in achieving their educational goals. They're required for a lot of degrees in the kinds of broad access institutions that we have partnered with. Prior to COVID, some STEM departments were really hesitant to offer those foundational STEM courses online because they were concerned about student success in those courses. But you know, in the world we live in now, that is no longer really an option, and we're already hearing that a lot of students are kind of voting with their feet in favor of online formats where those options exist. So learning how to deliver these courses effectively in online formats is going to be really essential. And now I think I'm going to hand the stage over to Nikki to take us through some more information about the collaborative.
Sure thing. Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks to everyone for joining us. It's nice to see so many friends and collaborators among the attendees today. So thanks for joining us. Definitely encourage you, if you have thoughts, ideas, reflections, don't hesitate to put them in the chat during the course of our description. In particular, as a new R&D center, we are looking to find our connections with the rest of the field. Some of them we know, but many of them we don't know. So the more you can help surface those for us, that would be great. So let me just dig into the nuts and bolts of the R&D Center to start. So first and foremost, as we conceptualized what a R&D Center around teaching and learning might focus on, you can imagine we thought about a range of disciplinary investigations and ways to study very particular elements of the teaching and learning enterprise. And the reason we settled on this self-directed learning basket of competencies is more because it's not necessarily about teaching mathematics or literacy or biology or history, but rather it's a set of skills that undergird the ability to be able to engage in that teaching and in that learning in effective ways. So that's part of what led us to this space. And as we've gotten out into the field, we realized there's some elements of this that are quite developed among practitioners in certain institutions, and there's others where this might be on the radar, and there's others where we're not necessarily seeing a lot of the explicit focus on self-directed learning skills. We aspire, as part of the 5 years of work, to come out of our research with an instructional model for faculty. The form and structure of that instructional model is to be developed in part because we want to co-develop it alongside our practitioner partners. But for those of you who've worked in this space and done this kind of instructional model development, we're very interested in learning the different pros and cons of different approaches and the ways in which that model can be developed to support its uptake ultimately. We want to advance educational equity by working with the colleges to support their capacity to improve instructional quality in ways that support diverse learners. So if you look at that national map of institutions that we're partnering with, they're all quite diverse. Obviously, they're diverse regionally, but they serve different populations, but they also oftentimes serve populations that have historically been underserved by higher education. So we entered this work with a real focus on helping those institutions in particular think about the ways that they can use more research, more evidence on self-directed learning to support faculty, to support students. And we hope to connect with other like institutions in the field as our work continues. And finally, as part of our charge as an R&D Center, we wanted to strengthen the feedback loops among researchers. So this is in part why we're here with you all today, practitioners and the educational technology development field. So we have certainly some IES funded ed tech researchers that we hope that we're able to connect with and share information with, but we also have the big players in the field, that those who work in online instruction, particularly on the software side, are familiar with. And we're trying to connect with them so that we can think about and share information that will guide their development process moving forward. So let me talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the work. Hannah, if you can move us forward. As you all know, these R&D centers have generally two strands. One's around a focused program of research, which I'll talk about first, and then around our national leadership and outreach. Our focused program of research is embedded in three primary strands. The first is a study of institutional policy and practice. In here, we really want to work with our partner institutions to better understand the approaches that support the transition to online courses and related policies. So the way to think about this is, what are the supports available for faculty as they develop online courses? So think of things like the instructional design space. Are those spaces, are those instructional designers thinking about self-directed learning? And if so, in what ways and how are they supporting faculty? Or is this happening at the department or division level? Or is this an institutional priority? We're also thinking a lot about incentives within the institutional analysis. So what incentives are available? What supports are available for faculty who may wish to improve their practice or really develop expertise and stronger practice as it relates to instruction and self-directed learning. So that's the institutional analysis. That's happening at all 9 of our institutions. But for a subset of the institution, likely about 6 colleges, we're actually going to be running some rapid cycle experiments where we test the technology-enabled instructional strategies that support strengthening mindsets and learning strategies in online courses. So one way to think about it is we're gaining a lot of information on context, the spaces in which the experimentation can happen, the moves, we like to sometimes think of it as the instructional moves that faculty have already made in this direction. And then that way we can think about the ways our experimentation can build on the progress that they've already started. So we'll use we have a phase of this work that's really designed around testing instructional strategies. Those instructional strategies we're surfacing in a number of ways. We're relying on research that some of you have come up with that has tested various self-directed learning strategies. Sometimes it's in the form of nudges, sometimes it's in the form of metacognition, sometimes it's in the form of time management tools and resources. So we've seen a lot out there, and we're definitely excited to hear more. So feel free to share those as well. We're also using some grounded approaches where we're seeing again what the seeds that have already been planted in our partner institutions and thinking about ways we can develop additional interventions based on the real and authentic challenges of practice that they're experiencing in their online learning environments. We're embedding this work in the STEM space, but we anticipate that it's going to have broad application. Again, there's nothing necessarily about these interventions that are discipline specific. There may be accommodations or adaptations that are made to particular courses, but our hope is our instructional model will ultimately have broad application. Lastly, and as I previewed, we want to design the instructional model. And while our practitioner partners, our institutional partners are going to be very pivotal in the testing of these interventions, they're also going to be active participants in the design process. So here we are hoping to stand up this model in years 4 and 5 of the center. The way to think about it, and again, we're still kind of figuring out all of the details, but the way to think about it would be this is a set of resources and supports that an institution or a department or even an instructor could think about embedding within their online course. And so it may be that there are pieces of it and facets of it that they could embed, or perhaps take the model even as a whole. So we're still working through the details of that, but I think that's going to be a wonderful learning experience, in part because we're trying to ensure that it's a very collaborative process. Now we can talk a little bit about our national leadership activities. So here with our national leadership, ultimately, what we're trying to do is really build cross-sector understanding, knowledge, and dialogue. And by that, what we're talking about is connecting our practice communities, our broad access institutions, our researchers, our developers, other intermediaries that play important roles within the field, to talk about the importance of self-directed learning and to really help amplify the evidence that we generate as part of the center. We want to gather input to understand how to best frame our findings in an ongoing process. So this gathering and gatherings that we will have across the life cycle of the center are really designed to hear from others and give center researchers fresh perspectives on the things we need to be looking for and the messaging we need to be emphasizing, and the ways in which our findings can be shared so that they resonate and are structured and messaged in effective ways. And then obviously we're trying to seed the ground throughout for the adoption of the instructional model that we develop. As I previewed, we're accomplishing these goals in a variety of ways, designing and facilitating interactive workshops. So if you haven't, you'll see it on the presentation, and Hannah can drop it in the chat, but we have a website, we have a Twitter handle, and we will be sharing through a listserv a number of activities that we develop over time. Some of them may be grounded in very particular pieces of research that we publish. Others may intended to be collaborative discussions that are generative and helping to connect the field and raise important issues that we will then take and consider as part of our research. We're also spending some time hosting listening sessions. We know we want to hear more from faculty, hear more from instructional designers, hear more from those individuals charged with developing quality online instruction. We're also hosting listening sessions and wanting to learn from the developer community. We know that they are producing lots of tools and software and other resources for the field. We in particular are focused on hearing from them and understanding ways our work can support them to develop products and services that make sense and are really aligned with the needs of the broad access college space. We want to foster exchange and awareness, and we'll obviously use social media, but we'll use meetings like this and other places as well to connect and to establish new and hopefully sustained relationships. And we'll develop workshops to scale the adoption of the instructional strategy. So after that co-development process that I talked about, we'll be spending quite a bit of time in the field, sharing the model, supporting institutions and those entities that serve institutions, supporting disciplinary associations and those entities that may reach faculty to make them aware of the model and to teach them about its use and the array of supports that we've created around it. So with that, I think we can move forward. I'm glad at this point that we were able to bring in Terrell Morton from University of Missouri to join us today. He doesn't know this, but I'm going to tell a funny story about when and how I surfaced his name to my colleagues at the R&D Center. And so I'll talk a little inside baseball. Those of us who are Black researchers know the world is pretty small. When we meet each other at meetings or other interactions, we tend to connect. And I connected with a colleague who is doing amazing work at Vanderbilt. If you don't know Nicole Joseph, you should. She's been doing fantastic work with math and gender in particular. She has a book coming out. So if you don't know that, you need to know. But as we were thinking about equity issues related to our work at the R&D Center, the first thing I did was Google some of Nicole's work, and she has a center where she invites people to speak. And guess who I found on the list of speakers? And I was intrigued by Terrell's work because, as Rebecca intimated, we are working at the intersection of a lot of different disciplinary topics. And there's very few people who actually, from a background training perspective, bring together, multiple strands. And I was just so amazed by what I saw in terms of Terrell's background and work that I told my colleagues at the R&D Center that we really need to talk to this guy. Now, it turns out SRI had already been, I think, connected to him one way or another, but it just goes to show that, there are, for those, I love to make the plug, for those who are really trying to reach and connect with scholars of color in the field. I'm not satisfied with the answer that they're not out there. The question really is are you working hard enough to find them? So I'm really delighted that we worked hard enough to find Terrell and look forward to his reflections on some of the work and some of the issues we're grappling with.
Well, I appreciate that introduction, Nikki, and I'm smiling really big because Nicole Joseph is a great friend, colleague, and mentor of mine. So just to know that this connection happened through other connections, they talk about 6 degrees of separation, but as you mentioned before, I feel like for Black academics, it's like 3 degrees at best. But I'm also super excited to be able to join you all today. As was shared, my name is Terrell Morton. I am an assistant professor of identity and justice and STEM education here at the University of Missouri, Columbia. And my research intimately focuses on identity as it informs students' persistence and engagement in post-secondary STEM spaces with an emphasis on Black women, Black students, first-generation college students, students from rural communities, and transfer students, asking very intimate questions about the relationship between their identity and their decision-making patterns, both metacognitively, cognitively, and behaviorally, if we actually see the manifestation of those decisions, and how they understand the relationship between themselves and that broader ecosystem that they're operating within. What are those cues? What are the signals? What are the signs? And how are they informing, again, that decision-making process that then shows up as the actions that we're able to record through our various measures? So coming from that perspective, the ideas that I'm going to be sharing at this particular time are very much situated and bounded within a critical race framework and an ecological systems framework. And I will get to that a little bit later in this conversation. But in situating my conversation, the first point of entry that I really want to bring up is actually defining equity. So we have so many ideas and conversations and discussions about what equity represents and what equity means. Yet, from my experience, there's always these differences in opinion in how we actually conceptually interpret equity. So some of you may have seen before, like that famous infographic sort of pictorial where you have those 3 Black or brown individuals who are attempting to watch a baseball game. And there is a fence that's in front of them that's preventing them from being able to fully see that baseball game. And in this graphic or pictorial, you'll see that when they talk about equity, it's a matter of providing an appropriate number of boxes for the individuals to stand upon in order for them to look over the fence and engage the baseball game. Conceptually, that means that equity is both aware of structural barriers that are in place that are preventing people from different demographic or different identity backgrounds from being able to enter, engage, access, fully interact with specific structures, opportunities. And so in acknowledging the fact that this structural barrier is in place, equity then requires us to provide appropriate resources, support, opportunities, and or endeavors to ensure that each individual is able to access and engage these spaces as it is appropriate for their specific needs. And so that equity metaphor is one where the tallest person doesn't need a box, because that tallest person is already able to see and engage the game. The medium height person only needs one box because they're able to stand on that box and now look over the fence. And the shortest person now needs 3 boxes or 2 boxes because they are not as vertically tall, for lack of a better words, as the other 2 individuals. And so they need that additional stepping stone. And so if we think about equity in this mindset of acknowledging structural barriers and providing resources to ensure that each group meets their specific needs, given their own identities, backgrounds, experiences, then the next thing that we should be thinking about in engaging this research is, who is our target audience? What is that group, that population that we're actually looking to serve? And in what capacity are we actually accounting for their social identities and lived experiences within our research and our design? And so if we think about social identities as categories, we talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about gender identity presentation, we talk about sexuality, we talk about religion, we talk about physical or neurological ability or capability. We can also include geographic location. And from a post-secondary perspective, if we're thinking about institutional types and student experiences, then we can talk about all of those non-traditional categories, such as being an adult learner, such as being a parent, such as being outside of, and I guess that counts for the adult learning, but outside that traditional 18 to 25 age gap, and the transferring between institutions, recognizing that despite the fact that our disciplines may present this fact, of content being sort of universal and standard across institutional types, we know for a fact that what you study at one institution is not guaranteed to be the exact same thing that you'll study at another institution, even if you're taking the same classes. And so in that design experiment and in that research project, how are you accounting for all of these factors multiplicatively applied to the specific population because of the fact that we are not just operating within individual identity axes? And so, yes, while I may be racially Black and genderly a cisgendered man, my experiences as a Black cisgendered man is not the same as the experiences of a Black cisgendered woman, despite the fact that we may share that same racial category. And so we have to think through those multiplicative lenses, because my experiences, again, as a Black cisgendered man from North Carolina may not be the same experiences as a Black cisgendered man from Missouri, and the access to resources and opportunities that we've been able to engage as a result of it. And so as you're thinking then about your targeted populations and you're asking critical questions about where the power lies in relationship to them and in the design and implementation of your research, and is the power situated within your targeted populations to be able to effectively use and leverage their voices to drive the project and change? Or is the power situated within you as the scholar, presuming that you understand and or know what is best for that targeted population? You have to then ask critical questions about your own epistemological and ontological understandings, and whose specific epistemological and ontological understandings that you both privilege and value within this space. And so when we talk about epistemology or understanding knowledge, what is, according to your value system and your belief system, situates what you determine to be knowledge and how knowledge can actually be assessed and measured appropriately? Recognizing that we are involved in education and we're involved in this concept of learning, what we determine to be our metrics for knowledge and knowledge growth or regression then determines the outcomes that we would then situate within our research, that would then shape the type of designs that we will be implementing as we're attempting to do some sort of intervention or innovation for these targeted populations. And so if we're not considering what our targeted populations recognize as knowledge, what our targeted populations value in this knowledge generation enterprise, then we are only appropriating and or potentially colonizing specific spaces because of how we're projecting our own assumptions, beliefs, and values on those individuals regarding, again, the structural issues that they may be facing and the resources that they may need as a result of it. And that is intimately connected then to how we understand this concept of ontology or reality. Feminist theories, particularly Black feminist theories, talk about standpoint epistemology. And how do we recognize the different standpoints that people have when they determine what is reality, given again how social systems and structures are operating on different bodies, given the intersections of their identities. And so if we have people who are saying, I'm entering into my STEM space, and it is hostile, and it is alienating, and it is isolating, and these are the factors for why it is hostile, alienating, and isolating, do we actually take into meaningfully account that lived reality of that person when we're now thinking about some of our interventions and designs? One of my papers that I have out here talks about this concept of Black X consciousness, which is this racialized metacognition. And in studying Black students in STEM and how they talk about the different ways in which they even perceive their STEM classrooms, where they sit within a STEM classroom, how they then present their identities as a result of the stereotypes and the stigmas and the biases that exist about Blackness and its capability or presumed lack thereof to be successful in their educational spaces. situates their entire learning experiences before they even open the book to talk about the specific academic content. And so these social psychological pressures are taking up energy cognitively, taking up energy neurobiologically, that is taking away from their opportunity to meaningfully engage with the content. And if we're not thinking about these kind of barriers, these kind of stereotypes, these kind of biases, as we're now talking about these different types of designs and self-regulated learning and opportunities for metacognitive praxis, then we're missing the mark as it regards to their ontological experiences, which would then more than likely show up in our outcomes, where we would then determine, well, Black students may not, quote unquote, benefit from X, Y, and Z because of how the outcomes of our research are situated. Which then leads us to thinking about this last question as we're talking about it through an equity lens. And it's how we are defining and engaging structural oppression and that broader social, political, historical, cultural ecosystem within our research and design. And so I intentionally talk about structural oppression because racism is real, racism is a fact, racism is structurally ingrained in our foundational understanding of life, particularly within the United States, given its inception that was built off of the forced extermination of the indigenous and the forced enslavement of the African people, and how that became codified into our laws and our social cultural norms and practices. Sexism is real, sexism is structural, and we can see that again based off of when we were writing our policies and procedures, who was actually being counted as a legal eligible citizen that could then contribute to the knowledge enterprise. And so if we understand that these systems not only exist, but are embedded in our fundamental conceptions of normality, how are we accounting for them within our research and our design process? Do we recognize that the knowledge learning process is as much social and cultural as it is cognitive? Do we account for the political nature of identities and experiences when we think about social identities, race, gender, and so on and so forth, but also institutional ranks if we think about power between teachers and students? Do we think about that historical component that's very much embedded in higher education, recognizing that higher education as a model stems from research related to like Tinto and Bean, whose models were rooted in suicide ideation, this idea of taking people from their communities, thoroughly immersing them within a population and stripping them from their outside influences as a way to socialize them into seeing and engaging and existing within those spaces. And we see that now in terms of how we continue to perpetuate this post-secondary and higher education enterprise. And so providing these thoughts, I do kind of want to leave you all with some questions as well as some resources as you're thinking about taking this equity-informed lens within this approach. And so I love using this particular activity because it requires us to think beyond what we might initially see when we're engaging with people. And so this first image that we have on the screen, I ask you to put in the chat box, what do you see? What stands out to you? Any takers? I always love like how as scholars and researchers and teachers, when we're talking with students, we're like, oh, engage, engage, engage. And then the moment that we get to be the students, we're sitting there like, All right, let's see. I see Angelina Jolie, cheekbones, cheekbones, red lipstick, satanic horns, lips, horns, Angelina Jolie, blood, red lips, good and evil, the horns, the lipstick, the female in the back, strong woman, contrast between dark and light, horns, devilish, girl in background, black is bad, blonde in danger, cheekbones, alienated, lonely woman turned villain. Ooh, good one. Black horns, why are her legs on her head? Great question. The woman in all black in front with horns, a woman in lighter clothes in the back, big collar, horns, Renaissance background, mountains, an intriguing cast of characters. So a lot of you all are pulling out on key components of this particular image. One being the central figure, which those who have named the actor Angelina Jolie is actor. And Angelina Jolie is portraying a particular character, which is Maleficent in the Sleeping Beauty storyline. Another thing that we've noticed outside of Angelina Jolie's features is the costuming and the juxtaposition between Angelina Jolie and the character in the background, and this dark light contrast that signifies for most of us this contrast between good and evil. And for those of us who may be familiar with the Sleeping Beauty storyline, the animated version, we're taught that Sleeping Beauty is innocent and Maleficent is evil. However, in this live action version, we learn a lot more about Maleficent's context and how she was living in fairy world among fairy people before King Stephen tried to come and colonize fairy world, and she had to take on this persona to protect her people. I asked this question in references to what we see, because as we then think about our students, or as we then think about individuals that we're interacting with, what are those perceptions that are driving how we're interacting and engaging with others? And do we see, if we click on the next image, something that represents this stereotypical socialized perspective of what somebody is supposed to be looking like, given again structural oppression? Or do we see what is actually transpiring in their lived experiences? And then within our own STEM classroom spaces or learning spaces and opportunities, as we are engaging with participants, do we see and assume certain actions and patterns of behaviors and needs of resources? Or are we, if you click again, attentive to all of those background experiences and identities that are shaping and impacting how our students are showing up within our spaces? And not just in thinking about this again in terms of our perceptions and engagements and defining the problem and engaging in research, but if we move forward, how then do we think about it in terms of our own positioning within that design process? And so on the next slide, using the same images, but with a different central figure, we should ask ourselves, for those of you who may not be familiar with this, Kevin Costner, Taraji P. Henson in the iconic movie Hidden Figures, the Kevin Costner character is actually a fictional character. There was no white savior in the actual storyline. Hollywood just positioned a white savior in the movie because they were afraid that white people would not appreciate the fact that there were 3 strong Black women who advocated for themselves and fought to break down barriers. And so in the creation of the design process, do we adopt a Kevin Costner-like mentality where we attempt to be saviors in our approach as we are looking to work with these targeted populations because of our own positionings and understandings? And the absolute last slide that I have for you are things to think about as you're grounding and bounding your own perspectives. This critical ecological perspective where we're looking at the relationship between the self and the external environment and all of those cues, factors, norms that are operating on people as they're making their decisions, and then how we can bound that within perspectives that intentionally call out structural racism and other forms of intersectional oppression, so that in moving forward, we're situating research and design from strength-based critical perspectives and designing interventions of the ecosystem rather than attempting interventions to fix a particular person. And hopefully I didn't take too much time.
Okay, I think it's my turn to unmute myself and help us transition. So we'd like to open up the conversation by moving to a Jamboard. I believe Hannah will share that screen and share a link to it. Hopefully everybody can access the link in the chat room. Once you're in the Jamboard, you'll see some of the discussion questions and you'll be able to just post your comments to help us start to get the conversation going, get some ideas out there. It will also give the center some things to reflect upon. And I encourage you to think about sort of Terrell's comments as well as some of the activities and focus areas of the center. And Hannah, are you going to share that Jamboard with us on your screen? Or should we just go to the Jamboard for a few minutes? We'll be there for about 3 minutes. And then we'll come back and we'll continue the conversation. And feel free to also use the chat if you're having problems.
Yes, and as you can see, the first page in the Jamboard is just like an overview of how to use the Jamboard in terms of accessing sticky notes, moving things around, and editing your sticky note by double clicking on it. And if you go through, you can see our discussion questions. Given the size of our group, we may not all be able to fit in the first Jamboard. So if you cannot access the first one, you're welcome to join the second.
I think we're going to give people about 3 minutes to start sharing ideas.
And I am now sharing all of the discussion questions on a slide, but you can also continue to click through the Jamboards to access them individually.
Okay, why don't we take another minute if you want to put in a couple last comments, and then we'll transition back to the group, and the center will lead us in a chat/conversation. And as we come back into the conversation, if people are sort of thinking about the connections that they've had through their work, maybe things that have motivated their research questions, things that they wish they would have done differently, or measures that they did use or wish existed for them to use, feel free to put that into the chat and to share these things, or to reach out to the Post-Sec Center if you don't, if it comes to mind later. But I think that our time is up for the Jamboard. So Rebecca, do you want to take this over and lead us through?
Yes, thank you, Meredith.
Thank you.
So I see, shall we keep the questions up or go back to the Jamboard? And it's unfortunate we can't get everybody into one Jamboard, so I'm trying to toggle back and forth between them. But I do see a couple common comments arising in both of these. So one is I will share that this was a comment and a concern that arose from reviewers when we submitted our proposal around, I see a hand, let's figure out how to put them side by side, around the concept of self-regulated learning and the implication that some students struggle in their courses because they lack self-control. And similarly concerns that it's a set of constructs that emerged from research that was largely conducted in homogeneous, mostly white environments, and that very little research has attempted to understand how some of these constructs might be perceived or might manifest across different cultures and contexts, and how even some of the terminology might, the way people think about and describe these kinds of skills and competencies might vary in different environments. I will just share quickly that one of the ways we are trying to address this concern is by seeking input from the field, from faculty, from students, from other stakeholders about what these concepts mean to them, how they talk about them, how they think about them in their work or in their studies. We've done a set of interviews with faculty and administrators during the fall, and have focus groups with students coming up in the spring. So as Nikki said, we are very concerned with how we bring the voices from the field into this work. And I think McInerney has advocated this use of emic approaches to allowing some of these concepts and the terms we use to describe them to emerge from the populations that we are engaging with in the research. So that is something we are trying to attend to. Let's see what other. I want to open up the floor and ask if anyone would like to comment on any of the points that you contributed here, or any reflections on how others have addressed some of these issues with concerns about the sort of implications of self-regulation in the research, or how we make sure that we're attentive to the way that this set of constructs and skills and competencies it manifests and is thought about in different areas, in different cultures and contexts. .
maybe this can jumpstart, recognizing that I'm kind of just jumping in, Rebecca. But one of the things that I like from, I think, the second Jamboard, under involving educators, someone wrote, I know people are trying to have students and teachers as advisors, not just participants. And then the other one, we've been considering having paid advisory panels comprised of students. I don't know if those particular people would be interested in speaking on that. But I definitely got excited in seeing that when we were talking about this idea of voices and, whose realities get the chance to shape how we even start our thought process related to this.
I'm not sure if all the participants have the ability to unmute yourself. If you want to speak, feel free to try to unmute yourself or to raise your hand in the hand option. We're not sure if there's been some functionality that's disabled, but you can also leave it in the chat.
I think raising your hands would be great.
Yeah.
I think
And-
folks end up at the top of the list if they were like in the participant list with their hands raised.
And, and I know as a program officer to some of the people who are in this room that some of them have extensively used the voices of teachers and students and have had very sort of like long relationships and see them as collaborators. Maybe not with SRI in post-secondary, but with other ways of doing it. And it is a challenge. But it's also a good way of sort of thinking, how do you make your research design understandable? How do you interpret some of the findings? So perhaps if you are one of those people, you can sort of talk about how that works and the team can think about how that could integrate what they're trying to do.
Let's see. I see we have a hand raised. Are you able to unmute yourself, Jen?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jen Vanek. I'm Director of Digital Learning and Research at the EdTech Center at Old Ed and involved in one of the other projects that Meredith is leading on an adult skills technology learning network of researchers recently funded by IES. We too are integrating into the Create Adult Skills Network. We're creating opportunities for learners to actually advise our network as a whole on, and that we hope that will help us understand how to bridge research practice divide and make sure that findings are communicated from the 6 funded studies in a way that teachers can actually make use of them and that learner voice is considered throughout the design of these different studies. I know that several of the studies themselves are also integrating learners in their advisory boards. And then I'm actually working on a Walmart Foundation funded study with Portland State University on understanding the ecosystem of relevant employer-supported education for frontline service workers. And we have a frontline service worker advisory board that we've found really critical in helping us understand theoretical perspectives that help us define our research protocols and actually support theoretical triangulation through our qualitative research. Through talking with this advisory board, we realized that the theoretical framework of using sort of sociocultural approach to qualitative study was not enough to help us get beyond the blinders of our positionality of white women researchers. And so we looked to foundational CRT literature and research in order to create an opportunity for theoretical triangulation that led to reshaping a lot of our research protocols and theoretical and analytical processes. So just really appreciate Dr. Morton and everything that you just said. And also thanks for letting me talk a little bit about the Create Adult Skills Network. And I hope others that work to integrate learner voice will reach out to us. I'll post the Twitter handle in the chat. Thanks.
That would be great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And if I could I could just press you a little bit further, Jen, I'm wondering if you could share an example or two of what kinds of changes you made to your frameworks or your understanding based on that triangulation.
We realized that so we were using I don't know if there are any sociocultural experts, sociocultural theory experts here, but we were using Engstrom and activity theory and activity systems models to try to understand the components of an ecosystem that would create a relevant employer-supported learning that would actually lead to real opportunity for these working learners in the workplace. And what we noticed was through a sociocultural model, we weren't able to pierce through the perception of the employers and many of the teachers and like the HR people, the stakeholders involved in shaping this learning in a way that really understood the working learner experience. So we were in our interview protocols, we would like say have a situation defined in one way by the supports people and in a completely different way by the working learners. And we just realized we needed to move to a critical lens in order to better understand the positionality and the insights of those support people and expose some of the barriers that the learners were facing, but these support providers were blind to. So we changed our interview protocols for the HR people and employers and education providers that we were interviewing.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else like to share any questions that that you have or have raised in the Jamboards or experiences with any of these questions that we're wrestling with? I'm curious about the comments of a group that's been considering having paid advisory panels comprised of students who are experiencing the topic of study. I'm really intrigued by that possibility and wondering what sorts of considerations come into play as you're exploring that possibility.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear a voice.
Oh, great. For some reason, I can't find where to raise my hand. The considerations that we had to take into account when we pay teachers to be on advisory boards include making sure that their place of work is okay with them receiving payment for being on our advisory board, and also figuring how much money was appropriate, and making sure that people at that facility weren't jealous or envious, or that other people were chosen and not them, and so forth, and really trying to think about how does one go about selecting who's going to be on the advisory board. And then in terms of students, a lot the adult I work with adult literacy students, and so they might have different issues compared to the ones you're going to be working with, but maybe not. I don't know. It was a matter of how to pay them, because they, often the university likes to pay via a check, and some of our students didn't have banking accounts where checks could automatically go in, or if we were to give them gift cards, what kind of gift cards would they appreciate? They may not have the supermarkets or credit cards, or used to using credit cards, things like that. So those were some of the considerations that we had to think about.
Thanks for sharing those. It resonates. We grapple with these complex ideas, but then so much of executing the work depends on really thinking through those kinds of details, like how do we actually compensate people who contribute to the research in ways that are useful for them, and in the context therein.
If I could just jump in for a second. We've worked we have quite a team of former instructors. We have a project, we've been working with IES funding for the last 10 years with post-secondary students in developmental writing and integrated reading and writing courses. So we have a curriculum that we've been studying. And we have several of the faculty that we've worked with in the studies who have become long-term advisors to us, helping us to revise the curriculum and redevelop it and make it, they know their students and their settings much better than we do. And so they can help us with things like making it, we always want to do too much. They help us to be more reasonable on our expectations. And dealing with the self-regulation piece, that's something that is harder for the faculty to figure out how to teach and how to integrate with the writing curriculum. The writing strategies that we teach themselves are the first tool for self-regulation. That's probably the most important thing that helps students to become more self-regulated. But other strategies like goal setting and progress monitoring and learning self-evaluation and reflecting on their learning, those kinds of strategies are really critical to success, we find. And of course, I think that the biggest thing that affects student self-efficacy is success. So you have to give them the tools so that they can be successful at their writing task. And then equally important, help them see for themselves that their writing has gotten better. And that's when their self-efficacy starts to improve. So just a couple thoughts.
Thank you for sharing this. And may I ask, was that Charles MacArthur speaking?
Yes, that's Charles MacArthur speaking.
Great, thank you. I knew you had your hand up, but I'm not actually able to see who's speaking in my Zoom window.
Yeah. So I'll type our website address. It's a little out of date, but I'll put it in the chat window if anybody's interested.
Thank you. I believe we are out of time. Deborah, did you want to say anything to wrap us up?
We really appreciate everyone's time today and contributions. We're actually going to leave the Jamboard up for a while. So if you have thoughts later and want to come back to them, you're welcome to do so. You can find us on the web. There's an email address and a Twitter handle. And please feel free to find us if you have any questions or want to have a conversation or share some resources of yours. And if you want a copy of the slides, we have your email addresses from the chat. And you can also email either Hannah Cheever, who put her address in the chat, or the Postsecondary Collaborative will send them out. Thank you so much. Have a great day.